The night he was pushed out of the house wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no shouting that echoed down the street, no doors slammed hard enough to shake the windows. It was quieter than that, and somehow that made it worse. The rain had just started falling, thin and cold, when he stood on the porch with a single backpack and his son's small hand wrapped tightly around his fingers. The house lights glowed warmly behind the curtains, but that warmth no longer belonged to him. In that moment, as the door closed and the lock turned, he realized his life had been reduced to what he could carry and what he could protect. He was a single father with nowhere to go, a child depending on him, and a past that had just erased him without mercy. Before the story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet strength that survives even the hardest moments, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach the hearts that need them most. He walked for nearly an hour that night, the rain soaking his shoes, his son's head heavy against his arm from exhaustion. Every step felt like a failure replaying itself. The marriage that had once felt solid had cracked slowly over years of stress, money problems, and unspoken resentment. When it finally broke, it didn't shatter evenly. She kept the house, the furniture, and the sense of normalcy. He kept his child, a job that barely paid enough, and the weight of responsibility that never slept. He told himself that as long as his son was safe, he could endure anything, but endurance didn't make the fear go away. It only taught him how to carry it silently. They ended up in a small, aging motel near the edge of town, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered and the walls smelled faintly of damp carpet and old detergent. He paid for 3 nights with what little cash he had left, knowing that after that, he had no plan. Each morning he woke before dawn, careful not to disturb his son, staring at the ceiling and calculating numbers that never worked. Rent deposits, food, school supplies, gas for work. The math always ended the same way, with a hollow space where hope should have been. His job was honest but unforgiving. Long hours, minimal pay, no flexibility. He worked through lunch breaks and volunteered for overtime that barely moved the needle. Every evening, he returned to the motel exhausted, forcing a smile so his son wouldn't see the cracks forming inside him. He told stories, made up little games, and pretended this was an adventure. Children believe what love tells them, and for a while, that belief was enough to keep the darkness at bay. On this 4th day, reality arrived without apology. His bank balance dropped below zero after an automatic payment went through. His card declined at a grocery store when he tried to buy bread and milk. He stood there frozen, heat crawling up his neck, while people waited behind him. He left without the food, gripping his son's hand so tightly he didn't realize he was hurting him until small fingers pulled away. That night, he lay awake listening to cars pass outside, the sound of tires on wet asphalt blending with the echo of his own thoughts. He had reached the edge, not an emotional breakdown, not tears, just a terrifying stillness where he didn't know what the next step was supposed to be. In the early hours of the morning, as gray light crept through the curtains, he remembered the old card. It had been tucked away in his wallet for years, almost forgotten. His grandmother had given it to him long ago, pressed into his palm with a smile that carried both mischief and trust. She had been a quiet woman, strong in ways that never demanded attention. The card wasn't meant for daily use, she had told him, but for moments when pride needed to step aside and survival came first. He had never used it. He hadn't wanted to. It felt like crossing a line he wasn't supposed to cross. Now, with his son sleeping beside him and the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest, pride felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. He didn't know exactly what the card held. He only knew it represented his grandmother's lifetime of careful saving and a belief that family should never be left helpless. His hands trembled slightly as he slipped it from his wallet, the plastic worn smooth at the edges. Later that morning, he walked into a bank branch, his son by his side, the air inside cool and sterile. He told himself he would only use what was necessary, just enough to get food and maybe secure a small apartment. When the teller processed the card, something shifted. Her expression changed from routine politeness to confusion, then to alarm. She excused herself, made a call, and within minutes the atmosphere around them tightened. Screens flickered, whispers passed behind glass offices, and a quiet urgency filled the space. What he didn't know was that the card was tied to an account that hadn't been touched in decades, an account that had grown silently, carefully, into a sum large enough to trigger alerts when accessed. The system flagged it instantly. To the bank, it looked like fraud, like a mistake, like a problem that required immediate attention. To him, it was simply a lifeline he hoped wouldn't disappear. They were asked to wait. His son swung his legs from the chair, oblivious, while he stared at the floor, heart pounding. Memories of his grandmother flooded back. Her small kitchen, the smell of tea, the way she listened more than she spoke. She had lived modestly, never showing signs of wealth, always saying that security didn't need to be loud. He realized then how little he had truly known about the depth of her foresight. Within the hour, a call was made that traveled far beyond the branch manager. The CEO of the bank himself was notified, not because of suspicion alone, but because the account told a story. Long-term investments, charitable transfers, and notes attached over the years painted a picture of a woman who had trusted the institution with her legacy. When the CEO reviewed the details and learned that the account holder's grandson was now a displaced single father, something stirred that had little to do with balance sheets. The call came while he was still seated in the branch. He didn't hear the words, but he saw the reaction. The manager straightened, nodded repeatedly, and glanced toward him with a different kind of respect. Moments later, he was invited into a private office. There were no accusations, no cold questions. Instead, there was a measured explanation, a recognition of the situation, and an apology for the distress. What followed didn't fix everything instantly, but it changed the direction of his life. The funds were confirmed, the account legally transferred, and support was offered in ways he hadn't expected. Not handouts, not charity disguised as paperwork, but guidance. Financial advisors explained options carefully, helping him understand how to use what his grandmother had left without destroying its purpose. The CEO himself requested a brief meeting, not as an authority figure, but as someone who understood loss and responsibility. That day, he walked out of the bank with groceries in his hands and a sense of ground beneath his feet for the first time in weeks. His son laughed in the parking lot, chasing pigeons, unaware that something invisible had shifted in their favor. That night, in the motel room, they ate a proper meal. He watched his child sleep, the rise and fall of his chest steady and peaceful, and felt release he hadn't allowed himself since the night he was forced out of the house. The weeks that followed were not a montage of instant success. Healing never works that way. He found a modest apartment, clean and bright, close enough to his son's school. He kept his job for a while, refusing to abandon the work ethic that had carried him through the hardest days. Slowly, with careful planning, he moved into a better position, using part of the inheritance not to escape responsibility, but to build stability. More importantly, he rebuilt something inside himself. The shame he had carried began to loosen its grip. He understood now that accepting help wasn't weakness, especially when that help was given with love and foresight. His grandmother had seen a future where he might stumble, and she had prepared a quiet safety net, trusting him to use it wisely. His relationship with his son deepened in ways hardship often forges. They developed rituals, small routines that made their new home feel safe. Bedtime stories, shared breakfasts, walks in the evening where they talked about everything and nothing. The child grew lighter, more confident, sensing the stability returning even if he couldn't name it. The bank never became just a bank again. He stayed in touch, not out of obligation, but gratitude. The CEO's gesture reminded him that institutions are made of people, and people sometimes choose compassion over convenience. It rose toward a piece of his faith in the world, the part that believes systems don't have to be cold to be effective. As months turned into a year, the memory of that rainy night softened, no longer sharp with fear but edged with gratitude. He knew now that being kicked out hadn't been the end of his story. It had been a brutal turning point, one that forced him to confront pride, fear, and the limits of doing everything alone. The old card had been more than access to money. It had been a message across time, a reminder that love can prepare for storms long before the clouds appear. If this story is touching something inside you, If it's reminding you of a moment when you or someone you love stood at the edge and kept going anyway, please take a moment now to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Your engagement tells us that stories of resilience and quiet kindness still matter. And before this story ends, I have one special request. Please comment below and tell us what you believe is the hardest part of starting over, or who in your life once helped you when you had nothing left. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. In the end, he never became famous, and his life never turned into a headline. What he gained was something far more enduring: a home built on intention, a child who felt safe, and a legacy that honored the woman who had believed in him long before he believed in himself. Sometimes, the most powerful rescues don't arrive with noise or applause. They arrive quietly, tucked inside an old card, waiting for the moment when survival becomes more important than pride.